last night Donald Trump went on the mainstream media to do an announcement basically about bragging about how great he thinks his first year is going. And I'll give him credit. There's definitely things that he has done that I like. Energy policies are good. Immigration policies good. Pushback against wokeism, good things. But mixed in there, Donald Trump was touting pushing for socialized medicine pricing controls. He's talking about his most favored nation policy. Here he is.
I'm doing what no politician of either party has ever done, standing up to the special interests to dramatically reduce the price of prescription drugs. I negotiated directly with the drug companies and foreign nations, which were taking advantage of our country for many decades, to slash prices on drugs and pharmaceuticals by as much as 400, 500, and even 600%. In other words, your drug costs will be plummeting downward. And I used the threat of tariffs to get foreign countries who would never have done it to pay the cost of this giant dollar reduction. They stopped ripping us off, and it began as of 4 days ago. There has never been anything like this in the history of our country. Drugs have only gone up, but now they'll be going down by numbers never conceived possible. It's called most favored nation, and no president has ever had the courage or ability to get this done until now. The first of these unprecedented price reductions will be available starting in January through a new website, trumprx.gov.
So that was Trump touting the most favored nation pricing policy, which is a pricing policy tying drug prices paid in the United States to the lowest prices paid in other developed nations. Now, the plan he was talking about was just done in November. That was with Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk. And it focused on a handful of specific drugs, mainly Ozempic and Wegovy and some other weight loss drugs, because, so many people in our country lack the discipline to actually, be responsible, eat well, exercise, take care of themselves. But I got this quote up here I put on, Trump saying, America was founded on liberty and independence, not government coercion, domination, and control. And he's literally just talking about how he was using government coercion to kind of get the drug companies to put the prices where he wants. So, I mean, that's what this is. This is pricing controls. And if Harris had won the election and was coming out and saying this, Republicans would be losing their minds, screaming about socialism, talking about how the Democrats don't respect the free markets. But it's Trump, so everybody cheers about it. And it's, socialized medicine, talking about, giving people cheaper drugs. So there's not going to be any pushback from the left because the left wants, healthcare to be completely free. And the right's not going to push back against it because it's Trump. But this is Donald Trump. Why isn't he advocating for free market solutions to the problem? How about reducing FDA regulations, especially when it comes to the efficacy of the drugs? We can argue back and forth, and I know that a lot of my free market ideas are extreme for a lot of people, so we won't even touch on getting rid of the safety regulations. But let's just talk about removing the efficacy requirements. Okay, if you get rid of the efficacy requirements, then let the doctors and the patients and the free market determine which drugs work. If the doctors, they've already been proven safe, so the doctors experiment, try different things with their patients, see what works, what doesn't work, and then that's how the free market will decide which drugs are good and which ones are bad. And drugs cost a lot to produce. It takes a long time. On average, it's about $1 to $2 billion per drug, and the process just to bring a single drug to market ranges between 10 to 15 years, and that's only for the drugs that actually even make it onto the market. A lot of drugs fail to make it through the regulatory process, and they have to make up the loss for the drugs that don't even make it to market. So they might spend hundreds of millions of dollars going through the trials and regulatory process trying to get the drug approved to go to market. Well, when that drug doesn't make it, they have to make up that loss somehow, and that's going to get tacked on top of the drugs that actually do make it to the market. Because pharmaceutical companies are not charities. They're companies. They're trying to make a profit. And I'm no friend to big pharma, I promise you. I think people are overly medicated. I don't believe in using pharmaceuticals. I don't believe in drugs at all. I don't think people should use recreational marijuana. I don't think people should use alcohol. I don't think drugs are good. But I'm not a fan of big pharma. I don't think they should ever receive subsidies. I don't think they should have the types of immunity from litigation that they do, especially regarding vaccines that was granted to them in the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986 and the Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act. So I'm just about free markets, okay? And they don't take into consideration the second, third, fourth order. This is the problem with central planning. See, the government comes out, they say, we're going to do this, but they don't look at what the second, third order effects are going to happen. You know, they call them unintended consequences. And sometimes I think they do know, and they just do it anyway. And then they just figure, well, we'll just deal with the fallout later. You know, we had the same thing in foreign policy called blowback, unintended consequences. But some of the things to consider about this price control, you know, the reduced profit margins could restrict research and development. That's going to stifle innovation, and, you know, possibly new drugs that could be beneficial are not even created. You're going to further distort the global drug pricing mechanism, you know, causing them to, you know, what if this backfires? They could just say, well, we'll just raise the rate. We'll just raise the prices that we're charging in Europe or other countries to what we're selling for in the U.S. markets. And that's going to end up having a negative impact. They could delay product launches of drugs altogether, or just stop producing them. They might just say, well, this, you know, if we can't offset our cost by selling them at a higher price in the United States, well, it doesn't make sense. We're just not going to produce this drug altogether. And then what? We get shortages. You know, there was this, I'm going to show this one article from MedPage. This guy wrote it. He's from the North Carolina School of Business. And it's, you know, it's talking about how Medicare payments could hurt smaller independent practices and rural clinics, which would potentially force patients to travel further to larger hospitals for care. You know, he gives this scenario of a 63-year-old woman in a rural county who relies on infused biologic rheumatoid arthritis treatment, and then her local clinic that she gets treated at closes down, so she has to travel 90 miles to a larger city to get the treatment that she needs. You know, I mean, that's a real scenario. And these are the things that people aren't considering. Everybody just hears, oh, that's good, cheaper medication, that's good, but they're not thinking about the second and third order effects. You know, he goes on to talk about and further explain, you know, when you factor in most favored nation, he says it's not that amid price compression that a company is going to sit around the boardroom and say, let's cut off rural patients. But every thin margin in the distribution chain will get thinner. Wholesalers will negotiate harder. Pharmacies will drop low volume products. Assistance that does not directly show up in the stock price gets trimmed. When an infusion suite decides which therapies to carry, the high complexity drug used by a small panel of rural patients will not be at the top of the list. And that's exactly right. And see, that's where people say, oh, well, that's heartless. You know, they shouldn't be concerned about the profit of their drug. They should only be concerned about helping the people. That is not what pharmaceutical companies do. Pharmaceutical companies produce medication, and they want to make a profit on selling that medication. That's all they do. And again, I'm not a fan of big pharma. I don't like the fact that there's vaccine requirements. I don't like the fact that a few years ago our government tried to force everybody to get an experimental vaccination. Like, I don't agree with that. That's not freedom. Just like Trump wanting to impose price controls is not free market economics. And we have to call this out, because this is incremental socialism, and it's crept in year after year, administration after administration, and it just keeps getting worse. And when we make excuses because, you know, the Republicans, they're saying, well, this is our team in the office, and then you support these socialist policies, it's a lot harder. The further it goes, it's going to be a lot harder to get rid of them. Thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment.